Hello everyone, welcome to this interview. We've got the lovely Marcus here from Mountain Pokhara Lodge in Nepal, and we're going to be talking today about how to engage both guests and staff in responsible tourism. And Marcus is very kindly given us his time today to talk through that with us. So hi Marcus, thank you very much for being here.
Namaste everyone and welcome. I'm Marcus from Tiger Mountain, as you just said. A lovely, warm, sunny day here in the middle of Nepal, east, west, north and south. It's great to be with you all and to share things.
Brilliant, thank you. So, yeah, the first question, if we can go on to that, Marcus, from your experience, what have been the most effective ways to communicate your responsible ethos, responsible tourism ethos, should I say, to your guests?
With all our responsible tourism, it's something that's grown and evolved. We didn't sort of wake up one morning with a tidy plan and that was it, and we then just implemented it. So it's a lot of trial and even more error, probably. I think the thing we learned very early on and wanted to be clear about is that it mustn't be preachy, because it's horrible if you sort of go on holiday and people start lecturing you about how you're evil and how you've bought a plastic toothbrush or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So really ensuring that everything we do was sort of low key, but that not an excuse for lazy. You know, it's intellectually joined up thinking, but it is very much, you know, up to the guests to engage rather than us to preach. I think that's the first thing. So that leads on. We have, our information is readily available. So we have an interesting sort of, rather than a room information folder or booklet that merely tells you how to get the laundry done or where housekeeping is, it goes into far more details about the local community, the environment. And within that, we have little boxes of sort of guidance points, whether it's cultural sensitivity, you know, suitable clothing to be worn when out on a village walk, or little tips for caring for the environment and how you can adopt a more greener lifestyle, as it were. And then the third we did is on the basis of the guests engaging us rather than us preaching at the guests, is to ensure that the staff really know their stuff. And if a guest says, why do you do this or how do you do that, they can answer. And we do quite a lot of training on that, sort of testing each other with trick questions and how the staff respond, or how I respond to a trick question from the staff. Or at least if they don't know the answer, getting someone to go to that particular guest and answer the question for them, so that there is good communication. And I think probably within the whole responsible or sustainable tourism world, good communications is important. I suppose it's important throughout life, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, that was really interesting. So first of all, your recommendation would be to not push it or pressurize any guests coming to you, but very much wait for them to start interacting with you in order to start the conversation.
Absolutely. We, you know, in our written material, in our communications, we will talk about the fact that we focus strongly on sustainability and responsible tourism. I suppose we ought quickly to just say, you know, what is responsible tourism? What is sustainable tourism? And I think the two words are very interchangeable. Probably responsible is used more in the UK and Europe, and sustainable more in the Americas, but they're actually the same thing. The sort of finer nuance is that responsible tourism is taking responsibility, hence responsible, for sustainable tourism.
Yes.
And I think that's the point. We can all talk conceptually, but it's actually important that someone picks up that nettle and actually runs with it. If that's not a mixed metaphor, I've never heard one before. But I think that is the important thing, that we take responsibility, we go for it. And so we write about it, but we don't want to ram it down people's throats. So at the end of the day, people are on holiday. And I think, you know, they've got enough stuff being told what they must do and mustn't do, can do and can't do in sort of daily life. So it should be relaxing, but at the same time, anyone who asks a question, there's an intelligent answer, hopefully, given.
Absolutely. Like you said, you very much work towards making sure your whole team, including yourself, can respond to questions very well in the best way possible, in the most helpful way possible. So that's a really great way to engage guests. What are the practical ways in which you engage guests at the lodge? Can you give us some
I think,
examples?
yeah, yeah. Um, the lodge is obviously, as a lodge, it's accommodation, but our main reason for being here is for people who want to do walks, because we've got obviously the high mountains of Nepal for classical Himalayan trekking.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were built sort of halfway between the lowlands and the highlands, in the hills in the middle, and we specialize in just day hikes. So we have three great guides, two Harrys and a Sajjan, and they're led by Jalak, our operations manager, who's a very keen naturalist. And so they spend most of their time with the guests, inevitably, because if you're going for a walk for 2 or 3 hours or a whole day, there's an awful lot of time for talking.
Mm-hmm.
And so the guides are our probably number one medium of engagement. So, walking through a village and a guest says, "Oh my gosh, look at that litter," because sadly litter is a big problem everywhere in the world. And of course, that's a nice entry point for a guide to say yes, but you notice that it's all plastic. You
Mm-hmm.
won't see, biodegradable litter, because that is all in the compost heap. And tin cans and stuff are all taken by scrap merchants
Mm-hmm.
who recycle it. So, just by natural conversation, the engagement happens without it becoming a sort of a formal lesson or didactic, or again preaching, as we mentioned earlier. So,
Yes.
so the guides are absolutely, I think, the key point, and can often use a walk to focus on something. So if a guest says, "But how do you educate children about this?" Well, there's always children running about. So the guide, let's say, "Hey guys, come over here and have a chat with the children." And he can act as an interpreter where needed, or, if the children are confident speaking English, and amazingly, the younger people are in Nepal now, the more they speak English. So, a wonderful engagement happens where the guest and the local community interact. We'll have problems with social distancing, of course, in the future, but we'll just have to work through that. But that is the way we do it. We do it as part of the process rather than as a standalone, now you're going to learn about sustainable tourism sort of approach. It's all just woven into the warp and weft of what we do every day, all the time.
Mm.
So that's, I think, the prime way we do it. I think there's various sort of conceptual things as well. It must be honest and it must be authentic, because there is far too much greenwashing out there. So I'm really keen and reiterate with all the team, that we don't want evasive answers. We don't want greenwashing. So have the courage to say, "I haven't a clue," if that's the honest answer, but
Yeah.
add to it, "But I'll find out and let you know as soon as we get back. We'll find out about that." And that goes for wildlife sightings as well. If you don't know what that small brown bird is, you don't call it a small brown bird. You look it up in the book and say, "Well, what do you think?" "I think it's that one."
Yeah.
So, honesty and authenticity are vital. And again, being available. So whether it's the guides, even out of hours, they'll come up and have a drink with the guests before supper in the evenings, things like that. So being available to chat and to discuss things when a guest talks about it. And also, of course, back to greenwashing and integrity, shall we say, live the belief. It's not just about talking about it, it's about doing it.
Yeah.
Because a guest will very quickly see you sort of talking about the environment and watch you throwing a piece of litter on the ground. Or, then it's pretty quick that you clearly don't give a damn about what you're saying.
Yeah.
So living the belief is, I think, a very important as well.
I really loved how you said that it's part of the process, and that's how you approach it, and it's interwoven into the experience, and it's not this separate lesson that you almost have. So I think that's wonderful the way you described it. Very useful indeed. So
Thank you. That's exactly it.
brilliant. So the next question: how important is it that guests leave with a lasting impression, and how do you influence that?
Well, you can't, I think you've got to be confident in what you do for first and foremost. And hopefully we all are. Um, I think one of the things is that when looking at the way we operated, and after a few years of doing it, I actually sort of said to myself, well, we'd do it this way even if there were no guests. And of course, that's slightly come back to haunt me today as we're locked down and we definitely have no guests. But we are still doing bird checking, butterfly counts, monitoring the environment, protecting the property, all those things. So we'd do it anyway. And I think that confidence, I suppose, which was it's a thin line. You must be confident but never arrogant. That is a bit like preaching again in another way. So we do it that way. But then think, what's the point of doing it if the guests don't have an impression? We want the guests to go away with some wonderful sort of impression, positive feelings, and I'm very happy to say that a vast number of our guests seem to do that. So that's lovely. And then, of course, why? Well, one thing is, one lodge being sustainable is very nice, but we want our guests to get out there and replicate, to multiply, to pass on the message, to be our missionaries, as it were. And staff too, it's not just the guests. Staff are allowed to go on holiday occasionally, and when they do, go back home to their families. It's really important that they also, if they see someone throwing litter on them, say, "Oh, put that in the bin, come on." Or, what are you doing hacking down those branches? Cut them off tidily, and they can all be missionaries for the reasons for sustainability and the whys for sustainability. So I think, it can be a little thing, going home and using less plastic or converting to a bioplastic if that's available, or small things, buying raw lentils, dry lentils, rather than buying packets of half-cooked lentils that you've then, got extra plastic packaging, whatever it may be. There's so many different things you can do that probably are not necessarily very large in themselves, but do all have a cumulative effect. One drop makes an ocean if there are enough of them put together.
Absolutely.
And so I think education, information, raising awareness, it's that multiplier effect. And I think that is the key, why the guests should go away, and the staff, with clear messages, takeaways, call them what you like, but hopefully an enthusiasm, because there's not much point doing it if you aren't enthusiastic about it. So I think that is important.
So do you have a mixture of people that come to you specifically for imagine the ethos and the approach to sustainable tourism that you have, but is there a pool of people that's all quite new to, and it's just a coincidence that's part of what you do? And how do you, what sort of impression have you seen being put on those sort of people?
That's a tricky question. It's a clever one. I think partly, and not just because of our reputation or whatever, but I think generally the world is far more clued up about sustainability in life, not just tourism. So I would say that probably our guests are much more aware than they were 20 years ago. And I think we're very lucky, we have a rich heritage in this subject. So we've been sort of doing it for a while. I can't say that I noticed different responses in different guests. It's probably too diffuse to pinpoint. But I definitely know that guests regularly ask interesting questions, and there is a clear interest in why we do things that way. A high percentage of guests will, in a passing remark or say something, and certainly on the marketing side, we do get quite a high level of guests commenting, "We liked your ethos and that's why we wanted to stay." So I think we've got something right there. But I can't say that there's literally two distinct sorts: those that have come because of it, and those that have learnt because they've been here, and as a coincidence, shall we say, incidentally. There must be, those two groups must be there, but they don't stand out as separate, I think is how I'd put it.
Okay. How do you get buy-in from your staff and team when it comes to responsible conservation tourism?
It's an interesting one. I was asked this question slightly differently the other day by another interviewer. And he said, how did you get to where you are today? And I said, well, I haven't a clue. We just did it, because we weren't sort of endlessly analyzing ourselves. But I think we have a heritage, which is lucky, and we're called Tiger Mountain for a reason. It comes from our founders, Tiger Tots, which pioneered wildlife safaris down in the southern plains of Nepal back in the 60s. And at the same time, the Mountain Travel Nepal, which started the trekking business in Nepal. And so both formed in the 60s, both with a long heritage. They came together and worked together from the 70s. And they were practicing what we would now call eco and sustainable tourism in different ways, elements of it, long before this, in the 60s. No one had a clue. These words meant different things. I don't think ecotourism existed in the 60s. I don't think the word existed, but it does now. And so for Tiger Mountain, drawing on that heritage, we could sort of adapt the experiences that we had seen in the founder companies and sort of gradually evolve them into a process and a style appropriate for us. And that's why responsible conservation tourism, yes, understood and talked about already, but conservation added, because I think that's a key point. We have 7 acres of compound or grounds here, and we have over 200 species of butterflies, 280 species of butterflies we've seen in the grounds. And so keeping the area natural is so important for the environmental aspects of sustainable tourism. I'm incredibly lucky, and Lisa, my colleague and co-owner, that we have 36 staff. 87% of them have been from the beginning, so 22 years putting up with me. Amazing guys and girls. It's 87%. But this has been a blessing for the sustainability side and the responsible tourism side, because it's allowed us to have a consistent approach. It's allowed us to evolve together, to live together, to learn together, and to grow together. So I think that is an absolute key element to what we do. Having that time and not having every season to go back to square one because you've got a whole load of new staff. So that is a real asset. And the staff themselves are, well, when we first started auditing, the lady who was auditing had to tell them to stop because they had so many ideas and so many different things to do. And she said, you can't do this all at once. But, the enthusiasm for it, when the initial, obviously, like anything new, there's a bit of suspicion and a bit of fear, and auditors are synonymous with policemen, But it wasn't like that at all. Very quickly, Jennifer was able to see that this was something that she was as much part of it as all of us were. And so this gave us a lovely chance for sharing ideas, asking for support, bouncing things around and seeing what we could do when. And we've gradually built up the sustainability package over the years. It's not been something that has just happened instantly overnight, as I said earlier. And I think, staff have got a lot of the good ideas, staff have come up with themselves. Just one little example, I remember last season, we had so many empty wine bottles and we were still using mineral water only where guests really demanded it. And our barman, Sujan, said, why don't we fill our empty wine bottles, clean them, relabel them, and fill them with our sterilized water and use that? And so we did. And the guests, there were 1 or 2 highly sensitive souls who particularly wanted mineral water, but the vast majority of them accepted this in lieu. And so now we hardly sell a mineral water bottle or give a mineral water bottle to anyone. And so there's been a vast saving in the plastics of them. One good idea from one barman. And that's just an example of many.
So it's very much having an open space in which anybody from any role within your staff can bring an idea, and that they feel safe and confident enough to bring that forward to you, essentially, rather than think it's just from the top.
Absolutely. We have a group, a staff forum called this. Yeah, I lost you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, we have a staff forum, the Sustainable Group, which the letters stand for SAG, which is, of course, spinach in Nepalese. So we thought that was quite fun. And we meet 3 or 4 times a year and discuss, and just it has 2 roles: discussing new ideas
Mm.
and monitoring former ideas that either have been implemented or we've forgotten about and need to remind ourselves of, or whatever. And yes, that's open to all and any staff. It's not compulsory, but no one should feel they can't come. Everyone is welcome. And it's proven, it started slowly, like these things do, but it's proven it's getting a really good momentum now, and we're getting lots of ideas coming out from it. So that's very positive.
Great, and that's how you get the buy-in, that you allow them to put forward their ideas. So that's brilliant. Great to hear. So,
Yes.
what steps can other hoteliers or other eco property owners that might be watching this, what can they do to start to engage their staff, or even create ambassadors? What would be the steps that you would recommend they took?
I think the first is it has to initiated be right from the top down. So as an owner or whatever, you have to commit to it, and you have to bring the staff on board saying that this is what we want for this hotel. This is what it's about. This is what the way we're going to be doing it. So obviously that means that as an owner, you must have some knowledge, because otherwise you're going to trip up very quickly and look a bit silly. So informing yourself and then understanding where you want to go with it is one. I think also, you must make sure that the properties maximizes the benefit and minimizes the adverse on community, culture, conservation, and commerce, to use what one organization calls the 4 C's, which I really like. And it also, I think those owners or senior directors must realize this can't be a short-term marketing gimmick. Yeah, this is something in the long run. This is really the core of your corporate DNA, or however you like to put it. There's so many ways of expressing it, but it really is important. I think second, and particularly to build confidence with staff and guests, is start small and start simple.
Yes.
Don't go for the big whammies straight away. Start with the little things that can be easily done, and you can show progress. And also engage with the staff right from the beginning. As we said earlier, they're the ones with the ideas. The guy who's having to sort out waste and throw it away is the guy who knows best how to separate it, how best to segregate and recycle, because he's doing it all the time, or he's not doing it, but he knows exactly how he would do it if he was asked to. So really, it is a team effort. It's a word that's used too often, but it really is a true word here. And I think the big mistake that we made, which looking back 2020 with hindsight, is recording the data, because we rushed in and did a lot, but we suddenly realized we had no baseline data against which to say, look, we've saved so much plastic, we've saved this, we've reduced that. And so record right from the beginning, because that way, if you weigh every recycling bin of plastic that isn't going to landfill but going to recycling, you suddenly say, we recycled 100 kilos of plastic. You've got some data. I think this is important for proving, again, the anti-greenwashing. You can validate your claims because you've got the data. That's, I think, very important. Second, it's a great thing at a staff meeting to be able to say, wow, you realize last year we had all this plastic that was going into landfill. Now we're recycling it. Well done, guys. And so, it's a reinforcing element to show and get the buy-in and all the things we've been talking about. So recording is really important. And it can be on the back. I think, it's very easy to get into very complex record keeping. And before you know it, you need to employ 3 people just to manage your sustainability. And small properties probably can't afford that luxury. And so it can just be the back of an envelope, a notebook. It doesn't have to be a beautiful scientific thing. We actually do use an online portal called Yardstick, which is a UK company. that started us on this journey of sustainability,
Mm-hmm.
in another form, another avatar. But and they, for a very reasonable, modest charge, give us an online portal that we can log in. We log our data there, and it's ultimately it's a database.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that, you can then extract the data for savings. You can look at your performance against sustainable development goals. You can look at your carbon footprint and see whether you're going up, down, or sideways in terms of carbon. So the benefit of the data logging is also in reinforcing your marketing, or however you use your sustainability program.
Mm.
Whether it's just for a nice personal self-satisfaction, whether it's to share with staff, or whether it is as a key plank of who you are and why you are for your guests and your market. So we're using that. We're looking to do some analysis on our sustainable development goal compliance now.
Mm.
That'll be probably in the next year. COVID-19 being what it is, it rather changes everything. So we're not sure. But the aim is certainly SDG alignment. And then second is how we can reduce our carbon and hopefully get to a zero carbon sort of position.
Mm.
We work closely with one of Nepal's airlines, local airlines, which has actually gone carbon neutral, which is a great step forward. And I don't know, there are many airlines even around the world that can claim that. So we work with them. We sort of feed off each other.
Mm.
So I think those are really the key ways I would say that a business looking to go sustainable is to take those 4 steps, but also it's a journey, not a destination. And I think you can start small because there's always more to go. And I think in terms of data and logging, there are 2 ways of looking at auditing. You've got certification where you get Travel Life or one of the big auditing agencies to come in and see how you comply with their standard. And that's nice, and that has its benefits. But I think verification, which is a slightly different version, is even more important. And probably in the early days, and in my experience for us, was better, which is where someone comes in, independent, third party, and they check your compliance against your own standards.
Yeah.
So you set your standards, you set your goals, and they say, yes, you have achieved that. Oh, come on, that's not really true. You haven't quite achieved, you've achieved 80% of that, not 100%. Yeah. So it is an audit, but it's an audit against yourself.
Mm.
And I think in the early days also for our staff, the natural human instinct to be competitive was built around this audit. So, we did this much last year, let's do more this year. And it creates that amazing sort of positive drive forwards.
Yeah.
So verification, I think, is a very useful tool. It's also probably, if you're just beginning, slightly less scary.
Well, it's a really good point you said, because also, everybody's got their own types of climate, they've got their own types of environment they're in. There's so many variables. It's very difficult to have this standard audit that might not apply the same way to everybody. And I think it's really interesting that you say, measure against yourself and you become competitive against yourself, and therefore what you are measuring is against, maybe what's important to you or makes no sense in that particular environment. So that's really, really interesting that you've said verification there. I think that's a really interesting point.
Thank you. It's something that we learned by accident, as it were. We learned by doing, but it really is a very effective way of doing things. And you absolutely hit on the problem with certification, is what I call the one size fits all factor. We've just got our second audit, certification audit, completed and approved. And I'm glad to say we got the gold standard for the second time, because it's every 2 years, so that's great.
Right.
But it was quite an uphill struggle in explaining certain aspects of how things are in Nepal, which are very different from a very European-centric auditing agency. So we had some fun on that and quite a few runarounds, but we got there in the end, and that's the most important thing.
Interesting. Okay, so coming up to the last question, really, is why is engaging guests and staff do you think, such an important aspect of running a responsible tourism business and eco-property? Why is that such an important element to being committed to being sustainable?
Well, I think, let's be candid, as a species, as the human species, has actually screwed up the earth pretty bad. We've, ruined natural environments, we've decimated species diversity, community cohesion and cultural degradation, even within our own human species, is really not good. And sadly, tourism has been a very contributing part of that. Not all of it, and not the totality, but it has had a very negative impact. And while tourism, I think there are some people in the development world that see tourism as the global solution to the world's problems, which is probably a little over-egging that omelette. Yeah. But good tourism, right tourism, really can mitigate the adverse and maximize the positive aspects. It is an industry that has a reputation for, killing the goose that lays the golden egg. We've seen it recently in very developed tourism destinations, like in, let's say, Venice or Barcelona, with over-tourism. And the impacts of just too much movement, too much swamping of one point. And I think these things have to be addressed. And I think sustainability, responsible tourism, and probably in terms of over-tourism, responsible tourism is the right word, because it's about someone, the community there, taking responsibility for sorting out over-tourism. I hadn't been to Venice for 20, 30 years and went last May and was horrified by the cruise ships ploughing down the Giudecca and just towering over the wonderful cityscape and frankly ruining it. I'm sorry to say it, I don't have much sympathy when that same cruise ship could moor out in the lagoon somewhere, and people could come in smaller numbers in boats. And yes, you stay there for 2 days, not 3, not 1, because it's not instant gratification. One group go, they come back, another group go. You reduce the overload in time. So I think that is a very important thing. We've all heard so much recently from Sir David Attenborough on the environmental side, and from Greta Thunberg on the climate side. And they've been amazing thought leaders and activists. And I think this has really raised public awareness of the problem. And from public awareness to personal action is the step we now have to take and are taking. I think the reduction in global plastic is phenomenal just as a result of Sir David Attenborough's films, Blue Planet and things. So it really is incredible. And we're starting for the majority to take action. There's a few deniers, but there always will be. So I think one of the roles of sustainable and responsible tourism is to share the medicine, the solutions or the potential solutions or the methods whereby we can, the tools to try and restore some balance and social harmony and environmental balance back so that tourism continues, but better tourism continues. And I think COVID-19 has given the travel industry, it's a dreadful thing, and I'm not gainsaying that in any way, but it has given travel, with all the shutdowns, a real once-in-a-lifetime global opportunity to rethink what is tourism, why is tourism, how is tourism. And I really hope that countries, communities, individual hotels, whatever it may be, individual tourism businesses, use this pause to rethink what they do and how they do it and why they do it. I think it's vital. Also, the coronavirus, we've seen a lot. Okay, some of it has been fake, like the dolphins in Venice, but the clean water in Venice, the cleaner water in the Upper Ganges, the cleaner air over some of the world's mega cities. Nature heals. Nature's capacity to resolve its problems without intervention is there. And with us humans being sort of out of the picture or in a much reduced way in the picture, it really has changed. And we're seeing improvements, environmental improvements.
Mm.
Sadly, a lot of them are going to go back to where they were if tourism just reopens up,
Mm.
wham bang. So we do need to think about that and to look at it. I don't think there are any easy answers, but I do think there are some clear lessons that we should be observing and learning. And I think that is vital. And that's why I really think, our staff and our guests have to be our missionaries, to go back, to think about it, to consider how, where, and why they travel, and what they can do to mitigate the adverse and to maximize the benefit. Because definitely not traveling is not the solution. Vast numbers of people desperately in need of the daily wages that they get from tourism related industries and support services are not having that now. So the old sort of chestnut of, oh, long haul travel is bad for climate. Yes, it is, but there's benefits at the end. So how do you mitigate that? There are no easy answers, but it does need to be considered. And I think we've all got to come up with our own personal viewpoint on it as far as travel, long haul travel goes. But let's all at least think about it.
Absolutely. No, it's been really interesting talking to you, Marcus, about it, because a lot of the more obvious things that people associate with sustainable properties is the big solar panels, which is great, and the water saving technology and all these things, but what you've talked about today is the importance of that, engaging the staff, engaging the guests, and how that's also such an important element of being committed to responsible tourism, and not just the kind of big obvious things that people sometimes associate with eco properties, essentially. So that's been really useful to talk through. So thank you so much for your time, Marcus, and hopefully we'll be hearing from you again soon.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It's been my pleasure, and best wishes from all of us here at Tiger Mountain in Nepal.